My wife wants to move on. The first time I noticed the change in her was subtle, almost imperceptible. A shift in her gaze, a quietness in the way she moved around the house. At first, I chalked it up to the stress of everyday life, the weight of responsibilities that were bearing down on us both. But then, it became more obvious. She stopped being present in the moments that once mattered. The lingering touches, the shared smiles, the quiet evenings spent in each other's company, all of it seemed to fade into the background. We had been married for 7 years. In those years, we had built something beautiful, or so I thought. A house that echoed with laughter, a shared life filled with memories, and a deep connection that felt unbreakable. But somewhere, in the complexity of our routines and the monotony of daily life, the foundation began to crack. At first, I tried to ignore it, convinced that this was just a rough patch, like the ones we had weathered before. But as the weeks passed, I began to feel her pull away, not just physically but emotionally. She was still there making dinner, taking care of the bills, handling the chores, but I could sense a distance between us. It was in the way she no longer asked about my day, the way she stopped looking at me the same way, the way her laughter didn't quite reach her eyes. I tried everything I could think of to bring us back to where we once were. I made plans for us to go out, hoping to rekindle the spark that had once burned so brightly between us. I'd surprise her with little gestures, flowers, her favorite dessert, a quiet evening at home. But each time, the effort felt one-sided. I began to wonder if she had already checked out, if she had already made up her mind. One evening, after a long, quiet dinner, I caught her staring out the window, her fingers absent-mindedly playing with the ring on her finger. I watched her for a moment, wondering if she even realized how much I was watching her, trying to read the unreadable. Her face was distant, and her eyes, those eyes that once held so much love, were now empty. She had already made up her mind, I realized. She was already gone, even if her body was still here. The next few days were filled with a strange tension, a silent understanding that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. It was as though we were both waiting for the inevitable, both afraid to speak the truth that we both knew was coming. She stopped initiating conversation. She stopped asking me how I was feeling. She seemed to be living her life in a quiet way, moving through the motions but never truly engaging. Then came the night it all came to a head. We were sitting in the living room, the glow of the TV flickering in the background, both of us wrapped in our own thoughts. I couldn't take the silence anymore, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between us. I turned to her, hoping against hope that there would still be something there, something that could save us. But when I looked at her, I knew she had already made up her mind. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. The finality in the way she moved was enough to make my heart stop. She turned to face me, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like forever. I could see the weariness in her face, the exhaustion from carrying something that had been too heavy for too long. She didn't say a word. Her face, however, told me everything. The way her lips were pressed together in a tight line, the slight furrow of her brow, was as though she was trying to hold back something that had been building for so long. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the words never came. Instead, she walked past me, not with anger, but with resignation. The next few days were a blur of quiet tension. She began staying in her room more, barely even acknowledging my presence. I tried to talk to her, but it was as if I was speaking to a wall. There was nothing left to say. I realized she had already made the decision to move on. It hurt more than I could describe, knowing that someone I had once shared everything with, someone I had built a life with, was now looking at a future without me. She no longer wanted to share her life with me. She no longer wanted the life we had created together. I watched her pack her things, her movements calm and steady, as though this had been something she had planned for a long time. The house that had once been filled with the sound of our laughter, our love, was now eerily quiet. I stood there, helpless, watching her take the last pieces of herself from this life we had built together. The bed we had once shared, the pictures we had hung on the walls, the small mementos of our life, it was all slowly being taken away, piece by piece. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. I couldn't understand how we had gotten here. We had been happy once, hadn't we? At least, I thought we had. I had tried to hold on, to fight for us, but I now realized that I had been fighting alone. I had been fighting for something that she had already let go of. There was no dramatic confrontation, no explosive argument. It wasn't a grand moment of betrayal. It was quiet, almost unnoticed, the slow unraveling of something that had once been whole. And in the end, that quiet departure was the most painful part. I wasn't given a chance to fight for us. I was simply left behind, standing in the wreckage of a love that had faded before my eyes. As the door closed behind her, I realized that this wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of the life I had known. I was left to rebuild from the ground up, to learn how to live without her, to face the reality that she had moved on without me long before I had ever realized. The days following her departure felt like an endless blur. I would wake up each morning in the same bed, the same house, yet everything felt different. The silence was deafening. Every room seemed hollow, echoing with the absence of her presence. I walked through the house aimlessly, touching things that had once meant so much to both of us: the kitchen counter where we had shared late-night conversations, the couch where we'd sat side by side for countless movies, the empty space beside me in bed where she used to lie. Everything felt foreign now. The emptiness was suffocating, a weight pressing down on me that I couldn't escape. I spent hours lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering where I had gone wrong. I thought about all the times I had tried to get her to open up, to talk to me, but the walls she built around herself had only gotten thicker over time. She had been shutting down long before she had made the decision to leave, and I had been too blind to see it. I blamed myself. I couldn't help it. I thought about the small ways I might have pushed her away without even realizing it. Maybe it was the times I had been too caught up in my own work, the moments I had let stress cloud my patience. Maybe I had failed to give her the attention she needed, to truly see her, to support her in the ways she had been silently asking for. I had been so focused on maintaining the life we had, on trying to keep everything running smoothly, that I had forgotten the most important thing: her. In the first few weeks, I couldn't bring myself to pack away her things. The sight of her clothes in the closet, her shoes by the door, the half-empty drawer she had left behind, it all felt like a reminder of how suddenly she was gone. Her absence was everywhere, in the smallest details, and I couldn't escape it. It was as though she had taken not only her belongings but a part of me with her. I tried to reach out, hoping for some closure, but each text, each attempt to get her to talk felt like a desperate plea, a reminder that she was no longer interested in what I had to say. She had already moved on, and I was left grasping at the remnants of something that no longer existed. The more I reached, the more distant she became. It was clear she didn't want to revisit the past, and that was a bitter pill to swallow. There were days when the pain was almost unbearable. I'd find myself sitting in the living room, staring at the empty spaces where our shared memories once filled the air. I'd try to talk to friends, but no one truly understood. They didn't see what I had seen. They didn't know the way her laugh used to fill the room, the way we had once whispered promises to each other in the dark. To them, she was just another ex, but to me, she was everything. She had been my partner, my best friend, and now she was gone. At times, I would stand in front of the mirror, searching for the person I used to be before all of this. But the reflection staring back at me seemed like a stranger. I didn't recognize the man who had been left behind. I had been so wrapped up in trying to hold on to her, trying to fix everything that had gone wrong, that I had lost sight of who I was. One night, I sat on the couch, scrolling through old pictures of us. I could still remember the way we used to look at each other, the way we laughed without a care in the world. But now, those pictures felt like ghosts, reminders of a time when everything felt right. I felt anger rise within me, mixed with sadness and regret. Why hadn't I done more? Why hadn't I been enough? As the days stretched into weeks, I slowly began to realize that there was no way to go back. I couldn't force her to love me again. I couldn't undo the hurt that had built up over time. No amount of pleading or regret would change what had already been decided. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. It was hard, so hard. But slowly, I started to understand that healing didn't come from holding on to the past. It came from letting go of the idea that we could ever go back to who we once were. Letting go of the resentment that I had allowed to fester, and letting go of the person I thought I was, so that I could become the person I needed to be. I spent weeks working on myself, reading, journaling, walking for hours in the quiet of the early morning, when the world still felt soft and untouched. I sought therapy, not because I thought I could fix the relationship, but because I knew I needed to fix myself. I needed to find peace in the chaos of what had happened. Slowly, I started to feel the weight lift, the sharpness of the pain dulled into a steady ache, a reminder that the love I had once shared wasn't something to regret, it was something to honor. One afternoon, while sitting in the park, watching the world move around me, I realized that I was no longer holding on to the past. The pain of her absence was still there, but it no longer consumed me. I was learning to live with it, to move forward, to embrace the uncertainty of what came next. She had moved on, but I was learning how to do the same. It didn't make me feel less of a person or a failure. In fact, it made me stronger. I understood now that relationships don't always last forever. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, people change, circumstances shift, and love fades. But that doesn't mean you stop loving yourself. That doesn't mean you stop growing, healing, and becoming who you are meant to be. As the months passed, I found myself looking forward to life again. I reconnected with old friends, started new hobbies, and allowed myself to feel joy without guilt. I wasn't running from the pain anymore. I was learning to live with it, to carry it as a part of my story, but not the whole of it. The love we had was real, and it had shaped me, even if it had ended in ways I hadn't expected. But I wasn't the same person who had once clung to the idea of fixing everything. I was becoming someone new, someone who had learned to move on, even when it felt impossible. And in time, I know I would be okay. As time went on, I started to embrace the silence in a way I hadn't before. The loneliness that had once felt like a dark, heavy cloud now became a space where I could learn to be with myself again. The grief of losing her had softened, and I was no longer consumed by the hurt of her absence. I had been through the most painful chapter of my life, but in that pain, I discovered pieces of myself I had long forgotten. I began to focus on the things I had put aside during our marriage, the small joys that had once made my heart light. I started painting again, something I hadn't touched in years. The colors on the canvas didn't ask for anything, and in return, they allowed me to pour out the emotions I had buried for so long. I felt a release each time I let the brushstroke flow freely. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of purpose that didn't depend on anyone else's validation. It wasn't easy. I still had bad days where memories of her would flood back in waves. The way she would smile when we woke up together, the scent of her perfume that lingered on the pillow. I missed the sound of her laughter, the way she would talk about her day in that excited way. I missed us. I missed the connection that once felt effortless. But I also learned to appreciate the space that her leaving had created, even if that space was painful at first. It gave me the opportunity to rebuild, to reclaim the person I had once been before the weight of our struggles had buried me. I started to find moments of peace in my routines. I made sure to take care of myself, not out of obligation, but because I had learned that my well-being mattered. I exercised more, started eating better, and began going out to explore places I had never visited, just for the sake of new experiences. I took walks through parks, sat in cafes with books, and made time to laugh again. Slowly, the joy that had been overshadowed by years of tension began to creep back into my life. And then, just as I thought I was finally healing, I saw her again. It wasn't planned. We ran into each other at a mutual friends gathering. She looked different, softer, like she had been through her own journey of healing. There was no awkwardness, no anger. Just a quiet understanding between us, a shared history that we both carried in different ways. Seeing her brought back a rush of emotions, but it wasn't like before. The pain wasn't as sharp, the grief wasn't as raw. I saw her for who she had become, not the woman I once knew, but the woman she had grown into. I realized that I was no longer holding on to the idea of the person I had once thought I was meant to be with. The past, in all its beauty and hurt, was just that, the past. I no longer defined myself by what we had lost. We spoke for a few minutes casually, like strangers who shared a history. There were no apologies, no demands for answers, just a simple exchange of pleasantries. She looked at me, and for the first time in a long while, I could see a glimmer of the woman I had once loved, but it was distant. It wasn't the same love that had once consumed me. It wasn't our love anymore. It had transformed into something else, something that no longer had a place in my life. As I walked away from that encounter, something in me shifted. I wasn't angry or resentful. I wasn't longing for what we had lost. Instead, I felt grateful. Grateful for the lessons I had learned through the heartbreak. Grateful for the strength I had found in myself when I thought I was beyond repair. I realized that I had loved her deeply, but I also loved myself now more than I ever had before. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew there would be more challenges, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't need her to complete me. I had already begun the journey of becoming whole again on my own. The man I was before her had been someone worth knowing, and the man I was now was someone worth loving. I understood that my happiness wasn't tied to anyone else's decisions or actions. It wasn't about waiting for someone to love me, to fill the emptiness. It was about learning to love myself first and foremost. That was the foundation I needed to move forward, to let go of the past with gratitude and embrace the future with hope. It was no longer about her, it was about me. And that was the most empowering realization I had ever come to.